Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. This is Chris Wright from Zephyr, and today we have a great webinar on conquering software quality metrics with a couple of industry-leading panelists who will shortly introduce. Thank you for joining us, everyone in the United States, while it's early this morning, and everyone in Europe, good afternoon. Just a little bit of a background on who will be involved in today's webinar. We have our very own Sanjay Zalavadia, our VP of Client Services, Rich Hale, who is the Director of QA at Go2Group, and David Herron, who is the VP of Software Production Management at DCG. Everyone within our panelists today bring more than 10 years of experience in software quality, and we really hope that this is insightful and everyone who joins and attends this webinar gains a great amount of knowledge. So just to kind of go over a little bit of what will be covered in today's webinar, we're going to be talking about what are metrics and why they're important, how do metrics apply in agile testing, how to determine exactly which metrics you should be measuring versus the ones you shouldn't be, and what specific metrics should be tracked at a project and organization level. Wonderful. Great. First question is to you, David. What are metrics and why are they important?
Thanks, Chris. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us as well. To answer your question, Chris, I think typically we simply say that we look at metrics as an objective quantification of an outcome.
Wonderful. Rich, would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. Again, thanks to everyone for joining. To kind of reiterate and expand on what David was saying, I think that it's been shown that establishing a metrics paradigm for a project, it's an important step towards enabling the stakeholders and the respective teams and departments to understand how exactly the project is progressing. If you're not really looking at what you're doing in some type of objective, quantitative way, then you really have no way of measuring or telling objectively how you're doing. So by using the proper metrics, and many of these have been established throughout software industry development as best practices, these metrics can help you validate you've got the right kinds of resources for a project. For instance, that's just one example.
Yeah, I think Rich makes a good point. I think we would bubble that up to say it's having the right information to make the best possible decisions.
Wonderful, thank you. And now that we have a better understanding of why metrics are so important, Sanjay, can you tell us a little bit about how metrics apply in agile testing?
Sure. So one thing I wanted to just kind of quickly highlight here is something that we often talk to our customers about here as well, is the fact that identifying the appropriate metrics, the relevant ones, the important ones for a particular organization or a particular project area is of course very key. One of the things that we also like to highlight is the delivery of these metrics, right? And my point here is that from a testing perspective specifically, teams are very much used to generating a report, in some fashion, manually or otherwise, and then sending it out, emailing it out, posting it somewhere, etc. And while this worked well enough, for those scenarios where your release cycles were several weeks long or multiple months long. In today's world, where in an agile testing and in an agile methodology arena, that simply isn't sufficient anymore, right? You have 2-week sprints, or we have multiple customers today, in fact, that have a couple of releases per week. So in that situation, having someone sit down, run a report, send it out once a day, twice a day, whatever the case may be, no longer is sufficient nor efficient for that matter. And what teams really need to consider is to make metrics available not only to the QA team, but to the entire project team in a real-time fashion, right? People need to have instant visibility on issues as they are occurring, whether it's defects, whether it's problems with the test environment, whatever the case may be, as it's actually happening.
Wonderful. And now that we have a better understanding of how metrics apply in agile testing, as we all know, which is the current trends, what about those other methodologies, maybe such as waterfall and older methodologies? David, can you speak a little bit more to that and how metrics change between different testing methodologies?
Sure. Obviously, there are some nuances. You can imagine there's some nuances between the different methodologies that would suggest that depending on the methodology, there may be some unique metrics. But at the end of the day, we typically work with our clients and consult our clients to suggest that really we want to be able to measure the effectiveness of the process in identifying and removing defects. As Sanjay talked to the Agile techniques, Agile is about the flow of work and to some degree considering velocity or the speed. So that's why we see metrics like this velocity chart that you're looking at and burn down chart to be able to move into a more predictive rather than reactive mode of measuring.
Wonderful. Rich, you as a QA manager at Go2Group, you interact with a lot of customers. What type of metrics are you seeing? Is there a lot of traditional metrics compared to agile metrics, or what do people tend to favor?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we see mostly is with the projects and the customers that are using like the waterfall and the traditional. I even talked to a customer just yesterday, and I said, "What process are you using?" And she said, "Iterative." And there was a big pause, and then she started laughing. So people I think everybody's realizing that from waterfall to agile, first of all, it's not always just like you flip a switch and you get there. There's a gradual process, and sometimes we're kind of changing the waterfall process. So given that, sometimes there's a mix of metrics. So you see the more traditional waterfall type metrics that are counting a lot of defects, counting the passes and the fails, and making ratios and metrics based on those. And then with the agile teams, the teams that are purely agile, they really stick to more of the agile metrics like velocity charts, burn ups, burn downs, cumulative flow diagrams, and those sorts of things.
Wonderful, thank you, Rich. But now stands the real question. We know how metrics apply in agile testing. We kind of have more insight on what type of metrics people are using. But now the real question is, how do you determine which metrics you should be using versus the ones you shouldn't? David?
To us, it's a simple matter of what do you need to know? What decisions need to be made? What information do you need to make those decisions? And what are the metrics that support making those decisions in a proper way? So it's really about looking at meaningful metrics for either at the project level, which we'll talk a little bit about later on, or at the organizational level. Some of those metrics could be the same. Some of them are going to be unique to projects and unique to organizations. But at the end of the day, it's about making decisions, and it's about managing risk with the best possible information available.
Wonderful. Rich, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would say that in a real project, in the real world, sometimes collaboration and compromise also needs to come into play when you're making these decisions. So I would say to get engaged early with the PMO, the executive management, and find out what they want to see. If they're not exactly sure, or maybe they don't have the right perspective in terms of a software project, there needs to be maybe a little education there and collaboration on helping everybody understand what the metrics that we're going to be looking at are and what the actionable conditions are when those metrics reach certain values.
Wonderful. Now that we have a better understanding of what type of metrics you should be testing versus the ones you shouldn't be testing, Sanjay, can you dive in a little bit more on exactly what type of metrics those are?
Sure. I guess one kind of additional thought I just wanted to bring up here, and Dave touched upon it to a small extent already, but as teams are identifying, what are the specific metrics that are relevant to their particular project, it's also important to identify the audience and what are the metrics that are relevant to them, right? And so what I mean here is that there will be granular level of metrics that the project teams specifically are interested in, whether it's the QA lead, the QA manager, the developer, etc., the PMs. And then there will be kind of more higher level metrics that are interesting to management, upper management, in terms of how efficiently the teams are working, how efficiently projects are getting completed or releases are getting out the door. And some of that, there will be a little bit of overlap between these two different sets, but I do feel it's important for teams to kind of consider that there will be some metrics that may be needed at a kind of a higher level, at an organization level, and then there will be teams, project teams that will want to, of course, drill down, get more granular around the specific things that are happening, hour by hour, during the day.
Wonderful. Rich, David, you both work in decent-sized companies with a lot of different companies, as well as a lot of different project teams. How would you categorize these different metrics? Rich?
I would say you could probably have a few major categories like project level. I don't know if this has been mentioned yet, but project level, team level, metrics, then department level, and then you get all the way up to company level metrics. So these different, sort of tiers of the company aren't always looking exactly at the same things. I would say at the project level, it's a shorter interval, it's a tighter interval. They make quicker decisions internally to try to adjust to certain changes in the project. Whereas at a company level, they're looking more at how things affect the big picture. Usually it's a longer term, those sorts of things.
Wonderful. David, is there anything you'd like to add?
Again, I agree with everything Rich said. I would probably simplify my response to say, at the project level, they're typically managing the delivery, managing the schedule, and at an organizational level, they're managing dollars. So, they want metrics that show those data points that are relevant to the audience that needs the information.
Wonderful. So, Rich, let's dive into some specific metrics here, okay? So let's get the audience some insight as to what project-level metrics that you think are important.
Yeah, so at the project level, it's usually around the specific, project entities like requirements and, the functional units that are being delivered. So requirements coverage, defects against those requirements and features, so defect distribution, open and close rates of defects help to measure kind of the productivity, I guess, of the team, and if we have enough resources, are we keeping up with the demand? And then finally, things like test execution can help us sort of monitor if the teams are keeping up with each other and what's going on in the final analysis with QA.
Wonderful. So as many of you can see here, we have these 5 major project level metrics: defect trends, defect densities, requirements coverage, the cost of poor quality, and the number of issues. Why don't everyone take a moment to kind of take a poll and see exactly how many of these metrics are you currently using? in the meantime, Sanjay, can you speak a little bit more about the importance of defect trends and defect density?
Yeah, sure. So I think, just to kind of cover off some of these that Rich has mentioned, what you want to keep track of, as you are going through the process of completing, or managing your schedule, managing the release process, is understanding the rate at which, defects are getting logged, how, quickly they're being addressed, what are the more severe ones, and more importantly, which defects are impacting which specific requirements or user stories that you're addressing in a particular sprint, right? And so having that visibility, again, as the testing is proceeding and as these issues are being found, again, in a real-time manner, become very important, so that the teams can then quickly gather and make a decision if there are specific user stories that are having, let's say, specific problems, to be able to kind of quickly address them, make a decision on whether the issues are significant enough where they need to be, it could impact deferring of the user story, or, is it something that can still be addressed within the time bounds of that particular sprint.
Wonderful. So it seems like the votes are in, and the majority of our audience is using about 2 to 6 of the metrics that we listed, which is great. We have that visibility. So to continue on, David, so now that we have an understanding of the important project level metrics and exactly which ones are being used, how do these metrics tie into Agile?
Yeah, so the metrics that so there's the results. Nice. So these metrics, in terms of how they tie to Agile, the need to know on the Agile project is the same need to know by and large on any project. The effectiveness of the practices and processes, the effectiveness of being able to identify and remove defects. So at some level, the measures specifically may not be exactly the same, but the outcomes that are being looked for and the information that's necessary to continue on and make changes and properly manage the project are typically the same. What we find in Agile projects that typically is missing, though, is an appropriate size measure. Yes, Agile projects use story points, and they look at some of their test data and test measures relative to story points. But we, for years, both in the waterfall and now in the Agile environment, advocate for the use of function points, or the functional size, the functional deliverable. I think Rich mentioned functional metrics somewhere earlier. So we typically talk about that as the missing metric with projects, whether they're waterfall or Agile.
Wonderful. So now that we have a better idea of exactly what project level metrics you should be using and why they tie into Agile, let's talk a little bit more about the organization level metrics. What organization level metrics would you use, and what decisions do they help you make? Sanjay?
Sure. So a couple of things here just want to highlight, right? And David made this point a little bit earlier. At the organization level, the management team is really, kind of focused on the dollars, right? Just to kind of boil it down. And towards that, I feel really what they're wanting to understand is the efficiency at which teams are running, how effectively they're closing out projects, etc. Right? So the metrics that you're going to be interested in tracking, and actually one additional point I want to make there also is that these metrics have to be something that is, of course, quantifiable for sure, so that not only are they able to get a good understanding of the specific level of efficiency, but if there are certain goals that they want to set, then again they can set quantifiable goals with the project team and be able to track those as well, right? So the point being overall that the metrics that you want to kind of consider at an organizational level are tracking those efficiencies. And are quantifiable in nature. Now, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Some of these metrics, it could be argued, are project level as well, and that's well and good. But the thought here was that let's take a look at some of the things that would be interesting at an upper management level, and we've kind of listed some of these out here already. So there's metrics such as defect removal efficiency. Defect distribution by status and phase, which kind of focuses on, what areas of your solution, your software platform, etc., are having kind of the larger, set of issues, etc. There's defect open and close rates. There's traceability, defects found pre-release, post-release, and so on.
Wonderful. So now that we have a better understanding of which organization-level metrics we should be using, let's take another poll to see which ones you guys are using. And in the meantime, Rich, could you talk a little bit more about the importance of traceability in a larger organization such as yours?
Sure. Traceability, I think, it's been shown to be extremely important. Every single customer that we talk to, one of the most important things to them about, and especially when they're talking about QA tools or the types of things that support their work, is traceability. It's one of the first questions we always get, and it's one of the questions we spend the most time talking about. Because, especially in nowadays, there's a big, I would say, incidents or whatever among all our customers. Tool shops are often mixed. It's not always a one vendor solution. There's a need for integration and to have these different tools, whether it's a bug tracking tool or a QA, test management tool, and have these tools talking to each other. So again, traceability comes up because the first kind of intuitive thought there when you start to mix tools is, hey, how are my QA team and dev team going to be able to sort of collaborate and do it in a streamlined, seamless fashion? So traceability is the natural, topic that comes up regarding that. You have no way of telling if your requirement is tested, by a particular test case unless you have traceability.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And it seems like we do have our results in, and the majority of people are using about 2 to 6 of the metrics that we talked about today, which is great. So to kind of further dive in, Sanjay, do you want to elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, well, so just one other thing I just want to kind of quickly mention, again, with respect to what Rich was just discussing, right? In our interactions with customers, one of the things that we find is that, teams, project teams definitely do understand the importance of traceability, as, Rich is indicating as well. What they're finding, though, is that managing or maintaining that traceability has been, difficult. And what ends up happening is that, they either decide to, kind of track this manually, which for larger projects could become, more and more tedious, difficult to do. And so oftentimes what happens is that it kind of falls on the wayside. So even though they understand the importance of it, because their tool sets don't really allow for various different systems within the tool set to communicate to each other or integrate with each other, they're not able to get this information automatically. And so, like I said, it kind of falls on the wayside. So I do like to kind of stress the fact that as you are selecting the appropriate tool sets to help with your agile process, this is something that you definitely want to keep in mind, which is metrics like these should be metrics that are automatically generated and made available from your tool sets, so that you're not spending time, number one, in putting this information together, and secondly, again, this information is now readily available to the entire team as things are changing in your testing and development process.
Wonderful. So we will take questions here shortly. If anyone in the audience does have questions for our great panelists, please think of them now. But while you guys are kind of culminating those ideas, David, can you talk just briefly about if these metrics are not tracked, what risk are you or your company at?
Well, if you're not tracking, first of all, if you're investing in the collection and storing of data and this information and not properly utilizing it, obviously it's just simply a waste of time and energy and resources. But if you're not tracking these, therefore you're not discovering trends, you're not being able to, as we talked about earlier, move into a more predictive mode. The tracking of this information is a challenge, though, I must say, because to collect the data, you need to get people into the habit of collecting data. Then you need to ensure that the data that's collected is accurate. And so you go through a period of time ensuring the accuracy of the data. And then you have to be collecting this data for some period of time before you really have enough data points to track and monitor trends. So we typically find the challenge of most organizations with their metrics activities is really what we call staying power, being able to be committed to the effort required and being able to understand and be aware that it's going to be some time from the time they start collecting data before they can have any meaningful trends or tracking of that data.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, David. That was great. And then, so before we get to the question portion, we would like everyone's feedback. We'd like to make these webinars as educational to our audience as possible. And we want to make sure that the topics we are addressing are the questions and concerns that you, the community, have. So if you would take a moment to just please fill out this next poll, we'll send you a free copy of our metrics, the value of testing metrics within software development white paper, a great written white paper by one of our industry's most knowledgeable. But in the meantime, we do have some questions coming in. If you have any, please feel free to ask them, and we'll start them off. So it seems like the first question here is specifically to Zephyr's solution, and what is the best way to visually track those metrics within Zephyr and Jira?
Right. So the question here is just to kind of reiterate it. What is the best way to visually show your requirement test case defect traceability? Good question. So two things here. To answer the question specifically, this is pretty much almost always in a tabular type of view. So basically, you have your list of requirements or user stories. For each of these user stories, you then have identification of the specific test cases that are providing coverage for that user story. Then for each individual test case, you'll then be able to see the number of times it has actually been run or executed and what the results for each of those runs would be, right? And then finally, if there are any defects that have been logged, you would be able to view those defects and get those defect IDs as well. Now, so again, to kind of address the question specifically, this is almost always a tabular view. Now, the key thing in this also to keep in mind is that as a part of this tabular view, you want to have the flexibility to be able to kind of reorganize, these pieces of information from whatever angle you need to view it, right? So if you want to view it from the user story perspective, you should be able to quickly take a look at it kind of from that angle. If you want to take a look at it from the defects and which requirements they are or user stories they are impacting, you should also be able to view it or organize it from the defect perspective and then map it back to your requirements or user stories. So those are the things that you should be looking for as you are, again, taking a look at the tools that you're bringing in as a part of your agile transformation, or to manage your agile methodologies. But again, to answer your question specifically, it's almost always a tabular view with that flexibility.
Wonderful, thank you. And so we're just at the cusp of our 30-minute mark, and we will take one more question for both. We will have one more question for both David and Rich to answer. But in the meantime, we want to thank everyone who hopped on today, and we will be sending out a recorded version of this webinar within the next 24 hours to everyone who did register. So thank you again for that. But in the meantime, our next question, Rich, will let you answer this one first, and David, you can add afterwards. But over the last 10 years, how have you really seen metrics change in the way that they are reported and visually shared? Rich?
Sure. Over the last 10 years, it seems to be evolving more and more towards modern tools being able to track the metrics and make reports available. Whereas 10 years ago, I was on several projects where I had to track metrics in an Excel spreadsheet. So while you're trying to put together a metrics program, I think paying attention to the tools you're using and what they offer, because a lot of these tools that are in the marketplace are not always created equally. So you pay careful attention to what features are available, and especially if you're interested in metrics, what the metrics features available are.
Wonderful. David, is there anything you would like to add?
I would agree that automation is one of the fundamental changes over the last 10 years. I would also say, and happy to say so since it's a lot of our business, but the importance of metrics in organizations, having them, using them, the importance of that has increased significantly, particularly even in the last 5 years, so, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that too.
Wonderful. Well, once again, thank you to our great panelists, Sanjay, Rich, and David, for participating in this webinar. We want to thank everyone who woke up early this morning in America on a Friday to attend. Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone in Europe. As I said before, this will be emailed out, a recorded version, to everyone who did participate, or who did attend this webinar. A recorded version will be emailed to you. On top of that, everyone who did participate in the feedback, in that email will also have the opportunity to for free get our software quality metrics white paper. With that being said, thank you for everyone once again for joining. Thank you to all of our panelists, and this concludes our webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.